Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. The air was thick with the scent of brewing coffee and the warmth of the kitchen as I went through our usual Thursday morning routine. It was my day off, a time to catch up on everything around the house, from fixing leaky faucets to mowing the lawn. But lately, my mind wasn't on household chores. I'd been sensing a shift, something just under the surface. My wife, Jenna, was becoming more withdrawn, distracted even. For the past couple of months, she'd been acting different, coming home later, glancing at her phone with a quick swipe before I could even ask who was calling. It's funny how denial works. You push down the things you don't want to see until they're impossible to ignore. I told myself it was work, that she was just tired from a busy week. But deep down, a growing knot in my gut wouldn't go away. I'd catch her slipping out of bed late at night, tiptoeing downstairs to make a phone call for work. And maybe I'd convinced myself to trust her. After all, 15 years of marriage should stand for something, right? But this Thursday felt different. When she left her phone on the kitchen counter, I saw it buzz and light up. Normally, Jenna kept her phone locked tighter than Fort Knox, but today, she'd forgotten. As it buzzed again, curiosity gnawed at me. I knew it wasn't right to look. I could almost hear my own voice, like an echo in my head, telling me to just let it go. But a third buzz sealed my fate. I stepped closer and looked at the message on the screen. My breath caught in my throat as I read, "Can't wait to see you this weekend. Remember to bring that dress." My fingers trembled, hovering over the screen as I processed the words. She hadn't mentioned any weekend plans to me. I struggled to come up with any innocent explanation, but the truth was plain and ugly in front of me. She was seeing someone else, lying her way through every work trip while I stayed home, taking care of everything we'd built together. I couldn't look away from that screen, unable to shake the betrayal searing into my mind. My hands shook with anger as I put the phone back exactly where she'd left it. It felt like someone had kicked me in the gut. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the counter, replaying the years in my head, wondering how long she'd been leading a double life. As much as it stung, I knew I had to confront her, to demand answers. But that wasn't enough. This was bigger than a single confrontation, bigger than some apology and promises to make it right. I wanted her to feel even a fraction of the pain she was putting me through. I spent the rest of the day gathering my thoughts. A confrontation now would only give her a chance to wriggle out with some half-baked excuse. I couldn't let that happen. So I decided to play along, pretending I hadn't seen anything, keeping my anger buried as I waited for her to slip up. That evening, Jenna came home late again, but I kept my face neutral, even welcoming. She threw me a brief, distracted smile, still scrolling through her messages as she placed her bag on the counter. Watching her move around the kitchen, I felt my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. I asked her about her day, nodding as she casually mentioned that she'd be going out of town again over the weekend for another work event. I didn't let on that I knew, just nodded and asked her where she was headed. She mumbled something about Chicago and rushed off to take a call. The anger was like a smoldering ember that refused to die, burning just enough to keep me focused. The next day, I followed Jenna's car as she left for work, taking a roundabout route so she wouldn't notice. I parked a few streets away from her office and watched from a distance, noting that she spent the entire lunch hour on her phone, laughing and texting like a teenager in love. I stayed there, watching her slip further into whatever life she was leading without me. The weekend loomed closer, and with each passing day, I crafted my plan, fine-tuning every detail to make sure it would go off perfectly. This was no longer about a simple confrontation, it was about revenge. I wanted her to feel exposed, ashamed, as though every illusion she'd built had crumbled at her feet. So I scheduled a night out for us, just the two of us at her favorite restaurant. It would be a chance to see if she'd come clean, to see if she could look me in the eye and keep lying. That Saturday night, I dressed up, kept my voice light and easy. "Come on, Jenna. Let's go have some fun. Just us." You deserve a break before your trip, I said, smiling like everything was fine. She hesitated, her fingers twitching nervously, but eventually, she agreed. When we arrived at the restaurant, I watched her closely as she talked about her big plans for the weekend, spinning the same old stories about meetings and conference sessions. I tried to focus on my breathing, on keeping my hands steady as I reached into my pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. I'd printed out the message she'd received, every painful word laid out in black and white. I slid the paper across the table, right between her wine glass and her plate. Jenna stopped mid-sentence, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the paper. She glanced back at me, and I could see the color drain from her face. She swallowed, opening her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I leaned back, watching her squirm as her mind raced to make sense of what she was seeing. Surprised? I asked, keeping my voice steady, almost casual. She stammered, reaching for her glass to take a shaky sip. I could almost see the excuses forming in her head, the way her eyes darted, trying to find an escape. But there wasn't one. Who gave you this? She finally managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. Does it matter? I shot back. What matters is that I know. And now, I'm done. Jenna's face went from pale to flushed red in seconds, her expression a mess of guilt, fear, and anger. She glanced around the restaurant as if the answer to her problems might appear in the crowd. I stayed silent, watching her squirm in her seat, fumbling for the right words. It was almost pathetic, really. She was so good at lying that it seemed she'd forgotten what the truth even looked like. Finally, she managed, "It's not what it looks like, Daniel. I can explain." The old me would have listened, given her a chance, maybe even bought into her excuses. But the old me was gone. I'd given her all the trust and patience I had, and she'd squandered it. All that was left now was a cold emptiness, and the urge to make her understand just how deep her betrayal cut. Go on then, I said, motioning for her to explain. Tell me how you just happened to forget about your weekend plans with some other guy. I'd love to hear it. She took a deep breath, her eyes darting around the table, searching for any way out of the mess she'd created. It was a mistake, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for it to happen, and I was going to end it. I swear. A mistake, I echoed, letting the words sink in. So what does that make me? Your backup plan? The guy you come home to after all your mistakes? She looked down, unable to meet my gaze. It's not like that. I love you, Daniel. I was confused, okay? Things were getting too routine between us, and I don't know. I guess I thought I needed something more. The way she said it, like our life was nothing more than a boring routine she had to spice up with her deceit, was almost laughable. I wanted to laugh, but instead, I felt a simmering rage bubbling up inside me. So you went looking for something more, huh? I leaned in, lowering my voice but making sure each word was clear. You know, I always thought our marriage was something special. Turns out, I was the only one who thought that. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the months of sneaking around, the lying, the complete disregard for the life we'd built together. She had thrown it all away for some fleeting thrill, and now she was asking for my sympathy. Daniel, please, she whispered, reaching across the table to take my hand. I pulled my hand back, the gesture making her flinch. She looked down at her hands, fidgeting nervously. I'll end it. I swear, I'll cut him off and we can work through this. Her words hung in the air, hollow and desperate. The pathetic pleading only solidified my decision. This wasn't just about her betrayal, it was about her complete lack of remorse until she got caught. And even then, the tears weren't for me or the pain she'd caused, they were for herself, for the life she knew she'd ruined. Jenna, I said quietly, my voice steady, it's too late for that. I don't want your promises. I don't even want an apology. What I want, is for you to feel exactly what you put me through. Her face twisted in confusion. What do you mean? You'll find out soon enough, I replied, standing up. I left some cash on the table for the check and turned to leave, not bothering to look back. For the first time since I found out about the affair, I felt a sense of relief. I had a plan, and the satisfaction of knowing that she was about to feel the consequences of her actions. When I got home, I walked into our bedroom, looking at the photos of us scattered around. Smiling memories, vacations, anniversaries. They were now relics of a life that no longer existed. I grabbed the frames, tossing each one into a box. The bed felt cold that night, but for the first time, I didn't care. I was done pretending. The next morning, I was up early, packing up the rest of her things. It was time to take control, time to show Jenna that she couldn't just brush this off like a minor inconvenience. I called my lawyer and started the paperwork for the divorce. This wasn't going to be just another breakup. She was going to lose everything she'd taken for granted. When Jenna finally showed up at the house, her face red and puffy from what I assumed was a night of sleepless worry, she froze in the doorway, staring at the boxes of her things stacked up by the door. What is this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "This," I said calmly, gesturing to the boxes, "is your life now. You thought you could have it all, the marriage, the affair, the lies. But it's over. I filed for divorce, and I want you out of my house by the end of the day." Her face crumpled, and she let out a small, desperate sob. "Daniel, please, don't do this. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. I love you." I shook my head. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this in the first place. I gave you everything, Jenna, and you threw it away like it meant nothing." She stumbled forward, dropping to her knees in front of me. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "I'll do anything. Just don't throw me away like this." It was a surreal moment, watching the woman I'd loved fall apart at my feet, begging for forgiveness that I no longer had in me to give. I reached down, pulling her up and guiding her toward the door. "You made your choice, Jenna," I said, my voice hardening. "Now, you have to live with it." As she stumbled out of the house, her eyes wide with shock, I felt a strange sense of peace. She was gone, and so was the life I'd thought we shared. But I wasn't finished yet. There was one more thing I needed to do to make sure she understood the depth of her betrayal. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found her family members. They deserved to know the truth about Jenna, the truth she'd hidden behind a mask of lies and deception. I called her parents first, then her sister, explaining everything in blunt, honest detail. There was silence on the other end of the line, and then a broken, whispered, "I'm so sorry." After I'd finished making the calls, I leaned back, a strange sense of relief settling over me. The final step in my plan was simple. I would walk away and rebuild my life, leaving her with nothing but the mess she'd created. She'd have to look everyone in the eye, knowing they all saw her for what she truly was. For the first time in months, I felt free. I had lost something, yes, but I'd also gained something invaluable, a sense of clarity, of purpose. I wasn't the man who would stand by and let someone make a fool of him. I had been loyal, but I was done being a doormat. The house was quiet now, and it felt empty without her. But it was an emptiness I could live with. In the days that followed, I expected to feel a flood of emotions, anger, regret, maybe even guilt. But all I felt was a strange calm, as if the storm inside me had finally settled. The house was quieter without Jenna, of course, but I found that I didn't mind. There was a strange sort of satisfaction in seeing her empty closet, the absence of her things a daily reminder that she was out of my life for good. But this was only the beginning. I'd told her family, but her circle of friends, her colleagues, they didn't know the truth. She had managed to paint herself as the perfect wife, the kind of person who wouldn't hurt a fly. But I wasn't about to let her walk away from this unscathed. With a deep breath, I opened my laptop and started typing. I knew some of her friends well enough that I could reach out to them, too. I thought about what to say, how to phrase it. There was no need for theatrics or embellishments. The truth was damning enough. I wrote. I know you've known Jenna and me for years, and you've probably seen our marriage as something solid, something genuine. But I want you to know the truth about what's happened. Jenna has been seeing someone else behind my back for months, lying about work trips, slipping out at all hours to meet him, and pretending to still be invested in our marriage while betraying everything we built together. I don't want sympathy, but I thought you deserved to know the truth. I pressed send, feeling a wave of satisfaction. She might have fooled everyone else for a while, but not anymore. The first reply came within minutes. Daniel, I can't believe this. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Then another, I'm here if you need anything. I can't imagine what you're going through. Each response reinforced my decision. The truth was out, and she would have to deal with the consequences. It was no longer just me bearing the weight of her lies. Now, the people who mattered to her most would see her as she truly was. But as much as I'd expected some sense of finality, there was something else gnawing at me. It was the reminder of all the little sacrifices I'd made, things she probably hadn't even noticed. I'd rearranged my life around her needs, her desires. And here I was, finally freed from it all, with a question hanging in the air: what now? With nothing but time, I started taking stock of my own life. There were so many things I'd put off, little dreams I'd set aside because they didn't fit into our shared life. Jenna hadn't been the type to compromise much. Everything always had to be her way. But with her gone, I was free to make choices for myself. I decided to start with small steps. I returned to the hobbies I'd abandoned, picking up my old camera and taking long drives into the countryside to capture the landscapes, something that had once brought me peace. Each shot was a piece of the new life I was building, a life in which her shadow didn't linger over every decision I made. Then, one day, I came across an old notebook while cleaning out a drawer. It was a list of places I'd wanted to visit, things I'd wanted to do before life became a routine. I laughed at the memories these ambitions brought back: a road trip up the coast, hiking the mountains, taking a woodworking class. Jenna had always rolled her eyes at it, calling it Daniel's pipe dream list. But looking at it now, it didn't seem so far-fetched. In fact, it felt possible for the first time in years. The next day, I started planning. I booked a few days off work and mapped out a route for a solo road trip along the coast. Just me, my camera, and the open road. I wanted to feel the wind in my face, to let go of the last fragments of the life I'd shared with her. The night before I left, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Jenna standing there, her face drawn and pale. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her clothes were wrinkled, and there was a desperation in her eyes I hadn't seen before. "Daniel, please, just hear me out," she said, her voice trembling. I leaned against the doorframe, folding my arms. What could you possibly have to say that would change anything? She took a shaky breath. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But I can't just walk away from this. I can't just let you go like this." I raised an eyebrow. "You had no problem letting me go when you were off with someone else. Why the sudden change of heart?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she reached out, placing a hand on my arm. "Because I was wrong, Daniel. I thought I needed something else, but the truth is, I was just running. From what? I don't even know. But I never stopped loving you." I shrugged her hand off, her words barely registering. "Funny how love only comes up when you're losing everything else, isn't it?" She swallowed, her face crumpling as she struggled to hold back the tears. "Please, just give me a chance. Let's try to rebuild this, to fix what we had." I felt a pang of something, pity, maybe. But that pity quickly evaporated when I remembered the late nights, the sneaking around, the lies she'd spun so easily. Jenna, there's nothing left to fix. The life we had? That's gone, and it's never coming back. She slumped, her shoulders sagging as though she'd finally accepted it. I don't know what to do without you, she whispered. For a moment, I almost wavered, almost let the memories soften my resolve. But then I thought of the road trip I'd planned, the notebook full of things I'd never done because of her. I'd given up enough of my life for her already. Maybe you'll have to figure that out on your own, I said quietly, stepping back inside. I closed the door, the finality of it echoing through the empty hallway. The next morning, I packed up the car and hit the road. The further I drove, the lighter I felt, as though I was shedding pieces of a life that no longer served me. I rolled down the windows, letting the cool coastal air fill the car, my camera ready for whatever I found along the way. The scenery blurred past me, the cliffs and the waves stretching endlessly. I pulled over at a scenic overlook, grabbing my camera to capture the moment. As I looked through the lens, I felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation, a sense of freedom, of possibility. For the first time in years, I was creating something for myself. And with each click of the shutter, I captured not just the landscape, but pieces of my own future. A future Jenna had no part in. The road stretched on, and each mile put more distance between me and the life I was leaving behind. There was a sense of finality in it, and I felt oddly at peace with the loneliness, maybe even a little exhilarated. The coast unfurled beside me, cliffs dropping into the crashing waves, the sky stretching endless and gray. I wasn't thinking about anything in particular, just soaking in the silence. No more deceit, no more pretending. Just me, my thoughts, and the wide-open road. I spent hours stopping at random towns, taking photos of quiet streets, rugged landscapes, and fishermen casting their nets in the early morning mist. It was the kind of peace I hadn't felt in years, a silence that didn't need to be filled. Each photo felt like a piece of the life I was beginning to claim as my own. I didn't have to answer to anyone, didn't have to be anything other than what I was in that exact moment. 3 days into the trip, I pulled into a small coastal town that looked like it had been preserved in time, tucked away from the world. It was quiet, barely a soul in sight, the only sound the waves pounding against the shore. I found a small inn just off the main street, its paint peeling and windows fogged from the cold sea air. It felt like the right place to stop, so I parked the car, checked in, and spent the evening exploring the cliffs nearby. That night, lying in bed, I felt a strange heaviness settle over me, as if all the emotions I'd kept at bay had finally caught up. I tried to brush it off as exhaustion, the effects of the long drive. But there was something more. An unease, a gnawing feeling that something was wrong. I pushed it aside, told myself it was nothing, and drifted into a restless sleep. The next morning, I woke to find my phone buzzing on the bedside table. Groggy, I picked it up, blinking against the bright screen. 3 missed calls from an unknown number. Before I could process it, the phone buzzed again, another incoming call. I hesitated, something in me resisting the urge to answer. But eventually, curiosity got the better of me, and I swiped to take the call. Hello. There was a pause, a shuffling of papers, and then a deep voice. Is this Daniel? Yes, who's calling? This is Dr. McKenna from St. Mary's Hospital. I'm calling about your wife, Jenna. The words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. My ex-wife, I corrected, more for my own benefit than for his. Yes, of course. I'm sorry to have to reach out like this, but she listed you as her emergency contact. Jenna was brought in early this morning. It appears she was in a car accident. Her condition is serious. I felt my hand tighten around the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. How serious? The doctor sighed, and I could practically hear the weight of the words he was trying to find. She's in critical condition. Head trauma, internal injuries. She's in surgery now. We can't say more until she's stable. I'm sorry, but I thought you should know. For a moment, I just stood there, numb. Memories flooded my mind, Jenna laughing in the kitchen, Jenna holding my hand at the movies, Jenna smiling on our wedding day. I shook them off, forcing myself back to reality. This was the same woman who betrayed me, shattered our life together. And yet, some part of me couldn't ignore that she was alone, lying in a hospital bed, and that I was the only one they had to call. "Thank you for letting me know," I said, my voice barely audible. The doctor murmured something in response, and the line went dead. I stared at the phone, a strange hollowness filling my chest. I spent the next few hours pacing the room, trying to convince myself not to go, that I didn't owe her anything. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the image of her lying in that hospital bed, fragile and helpless. Despite everything, there was still a part of me that cared, a part that hadn't been tainted by the betrayal. By noon, I was back on the road, retracing the miles I'd put between us, my mind racing with 1,000 questions. The anger I'd felt, the sense of betrayal, it all felt muted, overshadowed by something far more primal. Fear, maybe. Regret. Or just the undeniable fact that some connections, no matter how broken, aren't so easily severed. It was dark when I finally pulled up to the hospital, the fluorescent lights casting an eerie glow over the parking lot. My heart pounded as I walked through the sterile hallways, past bustling nurses and quiet, anxious families. At the front desk, I gave Jenna's name, and they directed me to the intensive care unit. As I approached her room, I caught sight of her through the small window in the door. She looked fragile, almost unrecognizable, tubes and wires attached to her body, the steady beep of monitors filling the silence. Her face was pale, a bandage covering one side of her head, her eyes closed. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the door handle, unsure if I could do this. But then I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was cold, sterile, the smell of antiseptic sharp in the air. I pulled up a chair and sat beside her, my gaze fixed on her face. It was strange, sitting there, knowing that this might be the last time I saw her. I wanted to feel anger, to remind myself of everything she'd done, to justify leaving and never looking back. But all I felt was sadness, a hollow, aching sadness for what could have been, for the love we'd shared before everything had gone so wrong. As the hours passed, I lost track of time, the quiet hum of the machines filling the silence. Nurses came and went, checking her vitals, adjusting her monitors. At one point, a young doctor came in, looking at me with sympathy. "She's stable for now, but it's still touch and go. We're doing everything we can." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. When he left, I reached out, hesitating before taking her hand. It felt cold, so much colder than I remembered. I squeezed it gently, wondering if she could feel it, if she even knew I was there. The night dragged on, and at some point, exhaustion took over. I closed my eyes, leaning back in the chair, memories of our life together flashing behind my eyelids. The laughter, the shared dreams, the plans we'd made. Somewhere along the way, I drifted into a restless sleep. I woke to the sound of a nurse's voice, soft and gentle. "Mr. Daniel." I blinked, disoriented, before remembering where I was. The nurse's face was kind, but there was something in her eyes that made my stomach drop. She didn't make it through the night. "I'm so sorry." The words echoed in my mind, hollow and cold. I looked over at the bed, at Jenna's still form, and felt a sharp, piercing ache in my chest. She was gone. And with her went the last remnants of the life we'd shared. I sat there, numb, not knowing how long I stayed in that chair, staring at the empty bed. The woman I had loved, the woman I had hated, the woman who had betrayed me, she was gone. And with her, the anger, the need for revenge, all of it felt so meaningless now. As I left the hospital, the world felt different, quieter somehow. The closure I thought I'd find in revenge, in moving on, it hadn't come. Instead, there was just a quiet, empty grief for the life we'd lost, the life we'd never have. I drove back to that little coastal town, feeling the weight of something I couldn't shake. The world kept moving, as indifferent as ever, but the bitterness I had clung to for so long had drained away, leaving behind a sadness I knew would stay with me forever. Y legs unsteady, and left the room.